All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So once again, welcome. My name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at ExoStar. And thanks for joining me today for our Preparing for Your CMMC Assessment, What You Need to Know. Before I jump into the formal presentation, just a few housekeeping details. So today's session is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour. That does include Q&A. Now, you're going to be muted during today's presentation. I did receive a few questions prior to today's session via when you signed up. I'll also be looking at the Q&A and the chat after as I conclude, just to see if any additional questions have come in. So please submit your questions that way as well. If for some reason we do have an outage, just wait for a minute and try to reconnect. You can either just refresh your screen or use that link you received via email to come back into the session. Now, if you'd like to speak with one of our CMMC experts, or if you have any additional questions, either from this session or anything you want to know about ExoStar, you can actually reach out to us a couple of different ways. You can email us at cmmc-team@exostar.com, or you can come to our website, www.exostar.com, and there's a chat feature there on every page where we'd be happy to answer your questions. All right, so during today's session, these are the topics and the major areas that I'll be covering. All right, let's dive in. So as I mentioned, the first thing I'm going to cover is kind of where we are in the CMMC rulemaking process. So as many of you know, 32 CFR, which is 32 of the Code of Federal Regulations, went into effect on 12/16/2024. What this meant for the CMMC program is that it actually was put into effect. What this means practically is that it formalized the assessment guides and the rules around CMMC. It also allowed the C3PAO organizations to start to accept people to schedule their CMMC assessment. Those processes and procedures are now in place. The 48 CFR, which is still in process, is that which will actually put the CMMC guidelines, or actually not guidelines, requirements into DoD contracts. So when that goes into effect, that's when you'll start to see those requirements start to show up contractually from the Department of Defense. Now, as we all know, what CMMC does is it moves us away from a time when organizations are able to self-attest to their current cybersecurity status. This moved them away from that self-attestation to now requiring third parties to attest and assess their compliance with NIST 800-171 or additional requirements based on the kind of information that you're going to receive as part of your federal contracts, in this case, those with the Department of Defense. It also defines a few terms across the cybersecurity landscape to better understand who does what. It brings into play this term called a cloud service provider, or CSP. And it defines that those folks who are utilizing a cloud service provider to store, process, or transmit CUI, those cloud service providers must be FedRAMP moderates. They must be in the FedRAMP marketplace, or they need to be FedRAMP moderate equivalent. And then external service providers, these are folks like MSPs or managed service providers. Sorry to use an acronym over an acronym, but an external service provider, most of us think of these as those managed service providers that we might utilize to perform one of our IT functions, or we may augment staff from a managed service provider to do some things for us. These organizations themselves don't have to be CMMC level 2, but their processes and their procedures, if they're doing something for you, they're going to be assessed as part of your overall system security plan. Now, obviously, with the new administration taking over in January, there was a regulatory freeze put into place. Now, that is no longer in effect. And 32 CFR was put into place before this happened. So that's why, the CMMC program has continued. People have started their assessments. They've started to schedule those assessments with C3PAOs. But the one thing it appears it may have done is affect the timing of that 48 CFR, right? That part that says these requirements are now part of your DoD contract. So that appears that that may have been one reason why we haven't seen that yet, and why that is still in process. But don't think that this is going to take CMMC away. Right. The CMMC program has been in development for a number of years. It was actually a priority during President Trump's previous administration. And the same people that were part of DoD then are back in the DoD today. And so we fully expect the program will continue forward, and these things will be put into place. Cybersecurity continues to be a major initiative across the Department of Defense, and the protection of that information continues to be critical, to the Department of Defense. Now, CMMC breaks the defense industrial base, if you will, into 3 different categories. And it's based on the kind of information you're going to receive as part of your contractual fulfillment, or it may be part of the information that you develop as part of that contract. And these levels are tied to different requirements around how you need to protect that information. Now, the majority of the contractors out there, or the subcontractors, are going to be level 1, right? So this is 63% of the defense industrial base. Will be required to meet those 15 requirements as outlined in the Federal Acquisition Regulation 52.204-21. This is going to be a self-assessment. You're going to determine that you do these 15 requirements, and you're going to annually affirm that you do those things, and you'll have to have that, ready to go when the contracts are let out to be bid upon. Now, level 2 means that as part of this contract, you may receive controlled unclassified information. And if you do receive that, you need to be in compliance with NIST 800-171-R2. Oftentimes, the question we get is, well, there is a NIST 800-171-R3 out today. So which one should I list? Which one do I have to actually adhere to? The Department of Defense explicitly calls out NIST 800-171-R2. So please look at that when you're determining what the requirements are for you. Now, for level 2, we bifurcate the kind of assessment that needs to be done. Now, a small percentage of contracts will allow the self-assessment and self-affirmation that you do these things, right? Less than 2%. And the contracting officer who's responsible for that contract is going to be the ones who tell you what's going to be the requirement here. Is it going to be, are we going to allow a self-assessment, or is it going to be a third-party assessment? So that'll become, when the contract is out there on the street, that'll be one of those requirements that you see. Now, if you're in that category of level 2, most likely you're going to need that certified third-party assessment organization to come out and certify you once every 3 years that you meet the requirements of NIST 800-171 R2. And you'll have to annually affirm that you still do those things. And then a small portion of the contracts are going to be level 3. Level 3 has additional requirements. It's not only the 110 controls from NIST 800-171, but it also includes 24 additional controls from NIST 800-172. And this assessment is done by DFARS. DFARS is an organization within the Department of Defense, and they're going to be the ones who you engage with once every 3 years to do that assessment. And again, every year you're going to have to annually affirm that you still do those things. So that's how the program itself breaks down. And again, you'll see what the requirements are based on the contract itself. Now, I'm going to leave the POA&M discussion aside just for a minute because we're covering that a little bit later. But just to let everyone know, a POA&M is a plan of action and milestones. So as I go through my self-assessment, if there's a control I don't have in place, I should create a POA&M, a plan of action and milestone to address that particular control. And I should have a plan, right? Plan of action and milestone of how I'm going to address that. And it should be assigned to somebody in my organization to do. And we should have a date against it. And we should track that item to closure so we can then obviously improve our overall cybersecurity posture. Now, when CMMC takes effect, it is also going to be phased in. When the 48 CFR becomes effective, the first year is going to kind of stay at the current phase. It's going to give the DIB itself a chance to get the necessary certifications, get themselves ready for those certifications, and actually action those. So where applicable, solicitations will require level 1 or level 2 self-assessment. That'll be kind of that first year. Then after that first year, that's where you're going to start to see the requirement for level 2 certifications. Then after those first 2 years, we'll start to see the requirements for level 3 certification appear in contracts. And then phase 4, after 3 years, you'll see full implementation. Now, the key here is that there will be some critical programs throughout this time period where the DoD says these are important enough that we're going to have CMMC requirements in advance of these planned phases. So there may be some critical programs that the DoD says, even though this is in phase 1, we're going to require that level 2 certification. And that'll be obviously in the bidding process. You'll see that requirement appear in those contractual requirements themselves. So just keep into effect, there may be some one-offs during these implementation phases. Now, I grabbed this graphic directly from the DoD site. That's what this link is here. And because we always get this question, everybody will be receiving a copy of today's presentation and a link to the recording of the presentation as well. All right. Now, even if, regardless if CMMC is in effect, there are some things that you need to be doing today to ensure that you are in compliance with your DoD contract. And I would always say, check your contracts to understand which DFARS clauses are requirements in those and what those requirements are for those clauses. Now, for this particular area, The DFARS clauses that are pertinent are the ones you see here, the 252-204-7012 and 7019. 7020s are the ones actually about CMMC itself. So not yet in effect, but you'll start to see those. But for 7012 and 7019, if you have those clauses currently in your contract, 7012 says that if I receive controlled unclassified information, I protect that in accordance with NIST 800-171. And you affirm that you do those things. Now, 7019 takes that one step further. It says that, okay, I actually am required to do a self-assessment of how I actually have implemented NIST 800-171. So I go through and I score myself against each of those 110 controls. Whether or not I've implemented that control or not, then I score myself. That gives me a score that I need then to enter into the SPRS system, Supplier Performance Risk System. This is a website done by the DoD, right? The DoD is the only folks that have access to this. You should have registered for it, gotten your necessary cage code, got what you need to log into the system. After you've done that evaluation of your compliance with NIST 800-171, create that score, you should enter that into the SPRS system. And we're going to cover how you do that scoring, again, just as part of this, because that is one of the things you should be doing to prepare for your overall assessment. So let's now start to talk about that. How do I go about preparing for my CMMC assessment? Now, the first thing we got to cover are the acronyms, because this is a government program, right? There are a lot of acronyms out there. So CMMC itself stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program. The organizations that I'm going to engage with to do that assessment are the C3PAOs. These are certified third-party assessment organizations. They're okayed, if you will, or they're approved by the Cyber AB. The Cyber AB is an independent body that manages the overall CMMC program. They are the ones who, if you will, validate these organizations, make sure they have all the right people, the right credentials, etc., necessary to do these third-party assessments. Now, as you start to hear a number of these kinds of sessions, webinars, information, etc., you're going to hear some additional terms, the OSA and the OSC. This is actually you, right? You are part of an organization either seeking assessment or an organization seeking certification, right? You're seeking assessment typically before you've engaged with that C3PAO. And then once you've engaged with that C3PAO, you're that organization seeking certification. And part of this is, since not every organization, kind of based on the levels, will need that third-party certification, but every organization still needs to assess how they're doing. Then we've already talked about the MSP, the managed service provider. Many organizations use these folks today to, again, maybe they perform a portion of your outsourced IT. Many of you may also engage with a managed security service provider. You may engage with, an MSSP to say manage your firewalls, configure those. There may be a third-party group doing those kinds of things for you. Now, when that C3PAO is done with their assessment and they're going to certify you, they're going to enter that into the EMAS system. EMAS, again, is a website that the DoD maintains that will be where your information for your certification is placed. And that's where the DoD can check your organization and validate that you've actually have that certification. And then obviously the DIB is the defense industrial base. It is all the primes, the subprimes, the contractors and the subcontractors that deliver software, services, products, and everything to the Department of Defense under contract. All right, now let's dive in again now to the assessment process itself. So as you start to build your assessment, and at the end of the day, what we're building is what's called an SSP, a system security plan. That system security plan should be all about how and where do I store, process, and transmit controlled unclassified information. And the best way for you to determine that is to actually create a data flow diagram that looks at each of your individual contracts, understands how you receive information from that contract, where you store that information, who in your organization touches that information, how do they process it? Are these Word documents that they go in and edit? Is this a manufactured good where you may take those specs and put them into a cutting machine, a CNC, a CAD CAM system to create a drawing, a design, etc.? What do I do to manipulate or process that information? How do I send it or transmit it to others in my organization or outside my organization? Who supports these various systems? Do I have internal IT? Do I have a managed service provider? And where are these things physically located? And sometimes the CUI itself are physical documents, right? I may have hard copies of things, and I may be storing those in a file cabinet. And part of, your CUI data flow may very well be, physical systems and physical security. And those things are part of the NIST 800-171 requirements. And these data flows will show you, if you will, the outline of that system, because you're going to want to also provide and develop a system diagram. And as part of that, you'll define the boundary of your system. Because when you engage with the assessor, one of the things they're going to ask for is, okay, is your entire organization, or are we evaluating your entire organization against NIST 800-171, or are we just evaluating a portion of your organization? And if it's a portion of your organization, where's that boundary? What are the things that are involved in your CUI? So what are your CUI assets, right? Where do I store, process, or transmit that CUI? What do I use to protect that information? And these, again, could be physical security. It could be IT services like firewalls. If I am using an MSP, are some of those my systems that they're managing for me? Or are these things that I'm utilizing from them to lock down my systems? Are there specialized assets, CNC machines, CAD CAM systems, etc., printers, 3D printers, etc.? Are there specialized assets that are part of my CUI data flow? And also then, what might also be included in here that's actually not part of the CUI data flow, but maybe it's in the same room, maybe it's in the same building, maybe it's part of the organization, but I want to clearly define what is not in my boundary as well. Because that's what the assessors are going to help them decide, what they're actually assessing. And it's up to you to define that for them, so they have a clear delineation of what they've got to take a look at. So you'll want that system diagram and network diagram to form part of the information you're maintaining So when you engage with that third party, you have that information available. And we'll cover that and I'll re-emphasize that in a bit when we talk about what that assessor is going to expect to get from you. We're then going to go through those NIST 800-171 controls. There are 110 controls in 14 different categories. They're not equally spread across, right? There's not, I don't know, like 8 in each one. Some have 3, some have 12. It is, if you will, different numbers in each of the different control families or categories. And these cover not only IT, right? We often think that, oh, this is an IT problem. It's not, right? Often things include, for example, your HR organization, because that's typically the part of your organization that's responsible for awareness and training. Now, IT may have some specific training around, third-party risk and external phishing and things like that. There's also things about personnel security. So there may be, again, HR policies and procedures around background checks and what do we do with visitors into our building, right? Around physical protection. So all of those kinds of things. So it's not just an IT thing. This is an organization-wide initiative. And CMMC itself is a program that you need to administer as such. Now, as we go through each of these different controls and these different the control families, and then each of the individual controls, we're going to need to assess whether or not we've actually implemented that control. And if we have, make sure that we know what we need to provide to prove that we actually do those things. And this is an example from the assessment guide, right? There's a NIST 800-171 Alpha. Alpha stands for the assessment guide. And it lays down each of the different controls. And it gives you these determine if statements. These determine if statements are kind of your guideline to say, okay, for this particular requirement, and this is an example of 3.1.3, right? This is, you must control the flow of CUI in accordance with approved authorizations. And then what you need to assess is, do I have information flow control policies defined? What are those? Okay, do I have a method of enforcement for controlling that flow? Do I know what those sources and destinations are? Do I have authorizations for controlling the flow, right? So, in order to get access to this system that stores, process, and transmits CUI, who authorizes that it's okay for a member of my organization to do that? How do we handle those approvals? So all of those things should be part of your implementation statements that say how you do that. And then you need to gather the information or the evidence that supports that you're actually doing these things. You need to make sure that your organization people are trained that these are our policies and procedures. This is who's doing it, and this is how they do it, because that's what the assessors are going to do when they come on site or do this over the web. They're going to ask the individual that's responsible for that particular control, okay, show me how you add an individual to an AD group, or show me that you actually have those groups defined. Show me that your approval process, that you're adding somebody new because one of your teams has a new team member and they now need access to it. And so all of those things are going to be part of your evidence and your overall control. So when the assessors do come and do your assessment, you have all that information available to them. And then obviously you also should have a periodic test and review of these controls, because that's also part of each of these individual controls typically. Is, we also review these controls once every year to determine if they're still valid. And we adjust if they're not. Now, when you go through your assessment, the assessment guide also has points available for each of the different controls. So each control is worth 1, 3, or 5 points. And so when you start your score, you start at 0. If you've implemented a control, you get a positive 1, 3, or 5. If you haven't implemented a control, you get a negative 1, 3, or 5. So that's why your score will range somewhere between a negative 203 and 110. Now, if you haven't implemented a control, you should create a POA&M, a plan of action and milestones. Now, when you see that POA&Ms are only allowed for controls worth 1 point, or POA&Ms must be closed within 180 days, what that's actually referring to is when an assessor comes on site and they're doing, their assessment. If they find that you've got a 5-point control that's not implemented yet, they're going to pause their assessment, and they're not going to be able to even give you a conditional assessment or a conditional pass, because that's one of those items that you're not allowed to have a POA&M against. Now, you should still create a POA&M for that 5-point if during your self-assessment you find it. But what that tells you really is that we're not ready yet to engage with that C3PAO. You really shouldn't engage with that C3PAO until you've closed all of those, 3 or 5-point POA&Ms that you might have had in your initial assessment. And there's only certain 1-point controls that are also allowed to be had when that certified third party shows up. Now, this is where it gets a little confusing, because you can engage with, or it's okay, I guess would be the right terminology, that when that certified third party is doing their assessment, if you've got at least a score of 188 and you've got only 1-point open POA&Ms against those allowed controls, they're going to give you a conditional assessment. You'll then have, you'll have a POA&M against those open items, and you'll have 180 days to close that POA&M. And then you'll re-engage with that same assessment organization, and they should be able to come out as part of their overall agreement. Make sure that you've actually closed those. You now successfully have passed those, and then you'll get the full certification. And I'll re-emphasize that as well. So this is that closing out that POA&M, right? So as you close out those POA&Ms, you're going to re-engage with that same certification organization that did your assessment, and they're going to then okay it, and then you'll get that final level 2 from a C3PO. And I just want to kind of point out on this slide on that right where it says CMMC status. Based on the level, and based on whether or not it's a self-assessment or a certified third-party assessment, you're going to have a particular kind of CMMC status assigned to your organization, right? The first 2 are about self-assessments. It's right. Level 1 is never a third-party assessment. It's always a self-assessment. And you're not allowed to have POA&Ms in level 1. Right? You're either good or you're not good. If you're not good, you can't get that contract, right? So you should always have a minimum of level 1. You should always meet those 15 requirements of level 1, and that's always going to be a self-attestation. and a yearly affirmation. It's when you start to get into level 2 where we start to bifurcate. So you've got that conditional level 2. So you've done your self-assessment. You have some open POA&Ms, but there are those 1-point ones that are okay to have open at least for 180 days. So I can give myself a conditional level 2 if I'm 88 points and I've only got those allowable level 1 controls. But then I've got 180 days to close those. If I don't, I've got to restart the process. I fall out, if you will, of conditional level 2. I'm no longer valid until I do another self-assessment. And I've then got 180 days. And so, but then I can be final level self too, right? I'm okay. I close these POA&Ms. I'm CMMC level 2 self. And then it goes from there where you start to now get to those third parties. Same thing with those third parties as I mentioned before. They come out, they do the assessment, they find some open items, open POA&Ms against those. They are those allowable 1-point controls. You got a minimum of 188 or I'm sorry, 88. I don't know why I say 188 because the max is a 110. My apologies. It's 88, and you've got the 1-point controls. And then they come out, they redo the assessment on those controls. You pass, and then you get final level 2. And then same way with level 3. Except DivCAC does those things. Now, when you start to think about, where do I need help? Okay, I've done my self-assessment. I'm not quite ready to engage with that third party. I just wanted to, kind of give you this. I got this from the Cyber AB Town Hall in April, just to give you an idea of the CMMC ecosystem. And the reason this is important, right, is because as you'll see, right, especially with that top line on the authorized C3PAO, so there's currently 67 C3PAOs out there. That is growing, right? You've got 21 that have passed the DivCAC assessment, and they're just waiting for the final authorizations to come through, and then they'll be C3PAOs. You've got 19 that are queued up to do that DivCAC assessment, and then you've got 510 that are somewhere in that application process. So the number of C3PAOs are growing as the rulemaking continues. And then the other folks are those other people, those other organizations or individuals that have done some kind of CMMC training, right? The certified assessors and the certified professionals, those are the folks that C3PAOs engage with to be part of the assessment team. That population obviously is also growing. So all of this ecosystem is being built up to support this overall program. It's one reason why we have that phased approach when coming into it. Now, when you engage with a C3PAO, this is kind of the expectation for the timeline before your assessment actually takes place. This is from the Cyber AB CMMC assessment process. Last month, I did a webinar with one of the ExoStar partners, Kyle Lai from KLC Associates. This is, if you will, kind of that assessment timeline, right? So, after you sign your contract with a C3PAO, you'll have that initial planning call. That's where they're going to lay out this schedule for you and what to expect. This is what, kind of how the engagement will go. So, 7 weeks before the assessment, all the way to 1 week before is when you're going to start to exchange information. That's where you're going to start to provide those network diagrams, those data flow diagrams, over your SSP itself and all of your documentation. It's where they're going to start to review that information. So when they come on site for that assessment week, they're ready to go. They have a plan of action. They have they should have provided to you the necessary people that they're going to need to engage with and on what days those are. So as you go through that assessment week, you have an expectation of, okay, on these days, I'm going to need, these 3 people from IT, this person from HR. That's when they're going to review those processes and procedures, and then they'll go through their assessment. 10 days after that, right, you'll get their preliminary findings. Met, not met, those different implementations. If for some reason there's a control that's not met, but you think you have done that, and maybe you were just missing some evidence, you'll have some time to respond to those questions. And then 30 days after the assessment is when that C3PO should have entered your information into the EMAS system. That EMAS system, they're the ones who will update that with your certification itself. So that's just kind of the schedule to expect as you engage with those third parties. Now, as I mentioned, before you engage with that third party, in that initial kind of week, you're going to have to provide them the information they need to complete their assessment. This is when you're going to need that system security plan, that network diagram, the scope diagram, your asset inventory, etc. One of the things that we've seen, and you'll see it in kind of the numbers in just a minute, is that some assessments have had to be paused because the organization seeking the certification doesn't have all the necessary information in place. So they've had to pause and restart, and there may be some additional fees and things like that involved in that. That's kind of up to you and your contract with the C3PAO. But there are a number of organizations that have started assessments, they haven't completed them, been paused, etc. So just make sure you have all your documentation and ducks in a row when you start that overall, when you engage with that C3PAO. And this is those numbers I was talking about, right? So 85 organizations through April have received their CMMC Level 2 certification. These numbers come from the Cyber AB from their town hall in April. 4 organizations have received a conditional CMMC Level 2, right? So they've got some open POA&Ms that need to be reevaluated. And then this is that number where I talked about 99 assessments are still active. And for some reason, the C3PO has not been able to complete those. Now, whether those have been paused, whether they've been, if you will, put back in the queue, etc., not really sure. We just know that 99 assessments are still active. Now, as you start to build toward this, ExoStar has some solutions that can help you. We've got a suite of applications, our Certification Assistant, Policy Pro, and our Managed Microsoft 365 that can help you in this journey. Certification Assistant will walk you through that self-assessment process. It builds that SSP for you. It allows you to centralize all that evidence, including your network diagram, data flow diagrams, the evidence around the different implementations you have for each of the different controls. And then if you don't have a control implemented, allows you to create that POA&M and manage that POA&M to closure. So again, it's an application that allows you to manage that overall CMMC program. As you go through that, if you need some help with the documentation around the different control families and what you might need to put in there, ExoStar's Policy Pro application is kind of solves that particular problem. Policy Pro includes templates for each of the different control families. You customize those templates to fit your organization. As you go through those, you can then create those policies. You can run them through an AI engine and then get a numerical score, including some key elements not included, which will be keywords, statements, technologies, etc., that aren't part of the statement you created that you might want to add to improve your overall score and address particular issues that people are looking for in that control. If you've already developed some policies and procedures for other standards, you can run those through the AI engine as well and get that score to indicate what you may need to customize that just to fit NIST 800-171. If you're looking for a secure enclave to store, process, or transmit that controlled unclassified information, that's where ExoStar's managed Microsoft 365 solution comes into play. That provides an enclave up in GCC High, built on top of a Teams environment that allows you to store, process, and transmit CUI there in the enclave that you basically access from your web browser only for those people in your organization that need to be part of that data flow. And then if you need help in any of these different stages, including when you're ready to engage with a C3PAO, ExoStar is a partner community that includes the ability to do both CMMC assessments. These can be everything from a gap analysis, a readiness assessment, a formal CMMC program, to a mock assessment if you want somebody to come out beforehand to see if you actually are ready for that C3PO. And then, as I mentioned before, some of these partners themselves are C3PAOs and they can help you with that. All right, so that kind of concludes my presentation today, except for the Q&A. We do have a poll available. We're gonna put that up, and I'd appreciate you giving us feedback on how we did today, but also let us know what you might want to learn about in later months. We do the CMMC webinar once a month. We also do product webinars throughout the month as well on both, and then we also do dedicated supply chain webinars as well. All right, let me first address those 4 questions that came in prior to today's session. So number 1, do all endpoints need to have FIPS mode enabled? Servers, firewalls, remote user laptops, etc. Well, so FIPS is all about encryption, and it's about the encryption algorithms for data either in flight or at rest. So for those systems that are storing, processing, or transmitting CUI, they need to have, encryption or, FIPS 140-2 encryption for those different modes at rest or in travel. Now, if the system that you're storing that information on has FIPS mode, it should be enabled with a FIPS 140-2 encryption module. Okay, so number 2, are there any resources available to help privately held microsave contractors in California with the cost of becoming NIST 800-171 compliant? The only funds we have found available are for places connected to public universities. I don't actually know specifically for California, though I did take a look, and I mean, some of the industry organizations, particularly MEPS programs, which are manufacturing programs that are typically sponsored at a state level, are the one organizations where I have found that there are monies available to get grants for NIST 800-171 compliance. Now, I did also take a look in California ones. The majority of the MEPS programs are actually sponsored by universities. Now, I don't know if that means their only funds are also for university affiliated organizations or if they are more general for manufacturers. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but the answer is I'm not sure. So what are the challenges to compliance when working remotely? Really, the biggest challenges of working remotely are to ensure that the endpoints you're using remotely are managed by the organization, they're kept up to date, they're utilizing a FIPS 142 encryption algorithm for both the storage and transmission of that CUI, that only those users who are allowed onto those systems have access to them. Ensuring that things outside, like printers and things like that, are also marked and included in that boundary where, kind of, that are encompassing of that. You can run into some trouble here if you allow BYOD devices and you're not managing those endpoints, because then they're really outside your control and they don't really fit around a system security plan. So those are kind of the gotchas, if you will, about working remotely that you need to think about for those users. So we often get this last question: how do you get your prime to provide guidance on what documents in the contract they consider CUI? We hear a lot from a number of folks about, well, so the organization's sending me, let me step back a minute. So organizations that create CUI are responsible for marking it as such. Now, if something comes to you that you think might be CUI, it behooves you to ask whoever sent that to you on if this is CUI, and if so, if it's not marked, can they please mark it, and then send it over. And if you're unsure, it also is one of those things that you should go back to that prime and ask them. Now, most of us, the contact over at the other organization is the contracting officer. So that would be the person I would go to ask them, as part of this contract, you've got this clause in here around CUI. Will I see CUI as part of this? If so, are you responsible for marking it? If we have questions about whether or not something is marked, who do we ask? And then I would ask those. If you just accept things, and then if you do receive something and you think it's CUI, like I said, go back, ask them if it is. If it is, please ask them to mark it. As I mentioned, as part of this deck, you'll get this information with this additional help. So I'm going to stop sharing now and just take a look at the chat to see if we got any questions. Is there an estimated cost on the C3 PAO? I haven't yet been able to get a C3PAO to give me an estimated cost, but what I will tell you is that I know our partner KLC does have a cost calculator on their site. So you could go to that partner website. They also have that around scheduling, right? They have a scheduler and things like that on their website itself. So that's all I see in chat, and I don't see anything in Q&A. So I want to thank everybody for your time and attention today. Have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. Again, if you have any questions, just please reach out to us. Thanks, and have a great day.